Hi, and welcome. And real quick, the Podcast Engineering School, the online training program, is starting on April 4th. Go to the website for all the details, podcastengineeringschool.com. That's right, it's going to be online training. Barry, you like online training, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
I thought so. So check out the website for more information, podcastengineeringschool.com. You're listening to the Airplane Geeks Podcast. Oh, I'm just kidding. I'm trying to make my guests feel at home. Max Flight is back. This is the Podcast Engineering Show, session number 39. Let's do this. Yeah! Yes! We're back. That's right. This is the Podcast Engineering Show. My name is Chris Curran, your host, your friend. Welcome to the show. This is episode 39. I produce podcasts for Forbes and Dun & Bradstreet, as well as select business authors and companies. And this show is all about the audio engineering side of podcast production. It's not about the marketing and the listeners and all that and the message and all that. It's not about that. This is literally about sound quality and coming off sounding great to your audience and really having a good impression on them and letting your audience listen without having to ride the volume knob, without having differences in voice quality. In fact, I just listened to an episode, a podcast episode that was produced by a podcasting expert, and he was incorporating all these different types of voices. And I did hear there's such a stark difference in the sound quality of each voice. I was hoping there was an EQ knob there. I was going to start EQing voices as the podcast was playing. That was a little surprising. However, there's a practical side to podcasting as well, that as long as you can hear the person, that's good. Maybe I'm a little picky, right? And yes, the Podcast Engineering School, I am so psyched that this is actually happening. It's going to be a 5-day in-person training, April 2nd to the 7th in Denver, Colorado. It's at the Curtis Hotel. We got the pre-webinars starting in March. I'm so psyched for this. This is the first one ever. The pricing in January is drastically reduced. This program, we're going to go over everything having to do with podcast production in depth. This is the audio engineering side of this, of podcast production, and that's what students are going to learn. Everything from audio fundamentals, hardware, software and plugins, recording, mixing, editing, connecting guests, mastering, publishing, and also the business aspect. This is for professionals. And at the end, each student is going to be a certified podcast engineer producer. So this is for people who want a career as a podcast producer or a podcast engineer, or people who want to go start their own business, start a podcast production company. So I'm going to obviously use all my background in audio engineering and the music business and all the success I've had in podcast production as well to teach students every aspect of this. Really deep, really awesome. I couldn't be more happy about it. Can you tell? Jeez. Oh, and find out more information on the website, podcastengineeringschool.com. And if it's not for you, maybe tell somebody about it. Maybe there's like a young kid. I have this vision of like some young kids coming, like 18, 19-year-olds who looking for a career. Maybe they didn't go to college, or maybe they did like I did 1 year of college and then left college. And that's what I did. Then I went to recording school for the music business. So it's totally possible for young people who have a little interest in the area of audio and recording, and usually it's people who play in bands and who are musicians and stuff. But there's careers out there now. So anyway, I'm so psyched. On this show, every week we bring you podcast production techniques on a silver platter. We get down and dirty, talking shop with podcast producers, engineers, and other specialists. And about 4.5 years ago, I entered podcasting, and I was pretty shocked to find that almost no one in podcasting has any real audio engineering skills or knowledge or background. And that's okay, because, hey, podcasting's fun. You just do it, and you have fun, and you learn as you go. But this show is here to help you become a better podcast engineer. And if you implement the best of what we talk about, not only will your podcasts sound better, but you'll produce them faster. You'll save time. Of course, Barry's here with me. What's up, Barry? How you doing, man? Are you feeling good today?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I almost forgot I had to ask him a yes/no question. I was like, "How you feeling today?"
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wait, sorry, wrong question. How you doing, Barry? Are you feeling good?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
See, it's all about what you ask Barry, okay? And if you have any questions for Barry, let me know. Podcast Multimedia Expo. It's in Orlando, Florida. It's in February. Are you going to be there? I'm going to be there. Podcast Multimedia Expo, February 23rd to 25th in Orlando. You got to check this out. This is one of the most well-done events I've ever attended, and I just went once last year. So they're doing it again this year, February 23rd to 25th. Website is podfest.us. All kinds of people are speaking there. It's at a really cool hotel. It's just going to be awesome. And yeah, anyway, I was actually going to say who I'm rooming with and what kind of major suite we reserved and all that. But you know what? I probably shouldn't say all that on the air. Max, right? I should probably keep some things private.
Yeah, keep it to yourself. I think so.
My goodness. All right. The other thing, Lexington, Kentucky, in the house. Are you, seriously, April 21st to 22nd. There's the podcasting course. It's in Lexington, Kentucky. This is the first course designed for podcasters in medical education. This is serious. I'm keynoting there. There's going to be tremendous trainers and experts there. So if you know anyone in the medical education field, seriously, send them a note. Lexington, Kentucky, the podcasting course, April 21st to 22nd. Seriously. So today we have basically our first real return guest, because Ralph Rivera, in my book, he really doesn't count. I mean, and let's ask
hear
Barry
what he has to say about that.
Barry, what did the last episode I did with Ralph Rivera? How did it sound to you?
It's a mess.
All right, it's a mess. So Max Flight, you are the host of the Airplane Geeks Podcast.
Yes.
You're also an airline pilot, right?
No. I'm not a pilot myself. I just hang out with lots of pilots.
All right. And you also co-host and produce the UAV Digest, which is another show,
right.
And the PAX
that's about
X
unmanned
podcast.
Aircraft. Yeah, that's a real niche podcast about in-flight entertainment systems and seat pitch and exciting stuff like that. But I tell you, Chris, you sound really pumped today. You're like really on a high.
I'm psyched because I woke up. I actually, my morning was a bit weird. And I was kind of like not really getting in the mood for the show. But you know what? You got to bring it. I'm bringing it.
You are. And, I'm like your target audience, Chris. I'm like almost completely self-taught. I mean, I've been doing this since 2008, but almost all of my technical skill is, self-learned. And some of it I think I've figured out pretty well, but there's other aspects to it where I'm probably just a hack and don't know it.
Well, you are much more than a hack. So if you're listening to this, Max was on episode 20 with me, 20. So go back, listen to episode 20 if you haven't heard it, because we go over Max's, all his equipment and his workflow. And really, you're not an average podcaster in terms of your audio setup, your audio knowledge. You really sound good. In fact, I did a little test training here in Colorado Springs about 4 months ago, and I grabbed sound clips from my production work, and I tried to grab some really crappy sound clips and some really good sound clips to show the difference to my students. And Max, your voice was your voice was the best sounding clip I could find from one of my guests.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm honored.
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, and so the reason you're back, part of the reason you're back, we have a bunch of different things to talk about, like the Waves D-Breath plugin you just spent time messing with. Yeah. One of your recent guests who was on some headset where the sibilance was off the charts and you had to really fix that. But really, the big things are that you just bought a new mic and a new mic preamp, right?
I did. I'm such a gear hound. I'm a sucker for gear.
Yeah, that's typically that, when you're into all this. It's like a hobby. It's like two hobbies together: audio quality and gear and podcasting.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So, before we get into your new mic, which I'm going to, well, I guess I could say it's an Aston Microphones Spirit. So
Yes.
Aston Microphones is the company, and the Spirit is the mic. You said they have one other mic as well.
Yeah, they have an Origin, which is similar,
Origin.
a little bit less featured.
Okay, the Origin. Okay, so you have the Spirit. And for the mic pre, you have a Warm Audio WA12 mic pre.
Right. Yes.
And is it really orange?
It really is. The face is orange. That was almost an impulse buy. It was. I saw it in the music shop, and it was used. It was in mint condition, so it had a really good price because it was used. And I looked at my wife, and she looked at me, and she said, "You really want that, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I kind of do, because I kind of been thinking about getting a nice preamp, so I bought it."
Very cool. So we're going to talk more about the mic and the preamp. But you and I, when we connected just before we started recording, we connected, and at some point you raised your voice a little, and I heard a slight wee bit of distortion. And I was like, So I went into, optimization mode or troubleshooting mode, whichever you want to consider it in this case. So let's cover quickly what we just did for your sound check, because the microphone it's a condenser, right?
That's right. That's the new part of it for me.
Right. It's a large diaphragm condenser, right?
That's right. Yep.
And it actually has a pad switch on it. So the pad switch, for those of you who don't know, many microphones have a pad switch. It's basically like you can have, there's usually 2 or 3 levels. So usually there's a 0, which means if it's on 0, there's no padding. I mean, there's no attenuation. Then there's usually a -10. And in your case, on the Spirit mic that you have, there's also a -20.
That's right.
So the reason you would use a pad is if, for instance, let's say you're recording something loud, like a guitar amp that's loud. If you keep it on 0 and you try to put the mic close to the guitar amp, it'll actually kind of blow out the mic itself. The mic itself will distort. So if you click it down to -20 on the pad, it'll record a loud guitar amp or anything loud, a concert, whatever. It'll record a loud signal, but it won't distort so easily, because it actually attenuates the signal within the mic itself. So my first thought when I heard your voice crackle just a hair, I was like, is there an attenuation switch? Well, actually, first I asked you, where was your mic pre? Like, how cranked up is your mic pre? And you told me that the knob was at like 9:30 or 10 o'clock.
Yeah, it was pretty low.
Which that's low for a mic pre for sure. Which is interesting. That means that mic pre must have a lot of gain.
I think it really does. I think it really kicks butt if you turn it up.
Right?
Yeah.
So I asked you about the mic, the preamp knob, and you said it's at, let's call it 10 o'clock. And then and then I asked you where it was going, and you told me it's going into your mixer. After the mic pre, it goes into your mixer in the line level input, and then it goes through a fader through the mixer, to the master bus, and from there it goes to your recording computer, right?
Yes. Yes, it goes to a digital audio recorder and to another laptop that I record in software.
Right. Perfect.
So I'm actually making 2 recordings.
Yes.
Back up. Always back up.
Yes. Cool. So what did we turn down? Oh, we put the pad on the mic first.
Right. I was running it at 0 because that seemed like the place to be. And you had me knock it down to -10 dB on the mic.
Right. And then
we adjusted. Yeah.
Right. And then just to even out the level, I had you crank the fader on the board.
Right.
To +10. When you crank it, is it +10?
+10 all the way.
Well, there you go.
I've never been above, unity, above 0 on the fader on the board before.
Right.
It was like uncharted territory. I was kind of nervous, but I trusted you, Chris. I trusted you.
There you go. So you attenuated the mic level right at the mic by 10, and then you pushed up the fader 10, and that was just so your voice level would be about the same level, so then I could hear if the distortion was still there. So you made some loud noises, and the distortion was still there slightly. So then what we did is we turned down the mic pre itself a hair.
Just a little bit. Yep.
So let's say it was at 10 o'clock, or let's say it was at 10:30 or whatever. And when I say 10 o'clock, I'm meaning like when looking at a clock. I mean, I hope everyone understands that. Like, where's the knob pointing as if it was a clock? That's a good way to, understand where it's pointing, because there's no level setting usually. I mean, there might be numbers around a mic pre that say like plus 20, plus 30, plus 40, plus 50, which you can go by that as well if you had that. But we weren't really diagnosing the exact level. We were just diagnosing the crackle, the slight distortion.
Yeah, we were looking at relative settings.
Right.
Yeah.
So you turn down the mic pre. Actually, I asked you to turn it down significantly, like maybe from 10 o'clock to 9 o'clock, like,
Right, we went past it.
Okay. And then it sounded better. That's when the distortion went away. So then I asked you to crank it up just a little more to see when it would, where the point was when it would sort of distort a little. And by the way, when I mean distort, I mean just sort of crackle a little bit. And also, it's not while Max was talking regular volume. When he's talking regular volume, it sounded fine. It's when he got excited and went, oh, hey, Barry, you've never gotten loud on a podcast, have you?
No way.
Yeah, he never. So, but when Max got loud, that's when you peak the level and you can hear the distortion. So, and it's funny, even sometimes when I was asking you, Max, say something loud, you're like, okay, loud. You're like, you're just a little louder, but some people are like, oh, loud. Anyway, so one other thing that came out of that whole getting rid of the slight distortion exercise that you and I did was that when I asked you to crank the fader up to plus 10, you were like, really?
I know. I thought that would introduce all kinds of nasty sounds and distortion or noise floor or something. But you taught me something very interesting about the relative background noise, I guess, of the fader versus the preamp.
Yeah, so this is a really good learning point here. A fader is technically cleaner than a preamp is in terms of introducing any noise. So if you're, let's say you're, how do I put this? So basically you can crank up your fader and it adds more gain, but with a little less noise. So one of my standard practices is that when I have a guest or anyone, even if it's someone in studio and I'm running their mic through the board, whatever signal's coming through the board, I will put the fader at plus 5 and I will turn down the mic pre. So the mic pre's working less, the mic pre's adding less noise, and the fader is making up for some gain, but the fader is actually cleaner than the mic pre. So you can, again, we're splitting hairs here pretty much too. This is very nuanced. But you can add more gain with your fader, and it's actually cleaner than the gain you add with a mic pre, technically.
Yeah, fascinating. And we love nuance.
We really do. That's a great trick. I don't know. I always love that. And it's because the faders are, well, look, I don't want to get any more technical than that. No need to get any more technical than that. But that's just a great trick to get more gain, to get more clean gain, is you can bump up your fader a little. Now, you still got to look at the level on the master bus. You got to still monitor your levels. You can't just crank up the fader and say, ooh, Chris said it's cleaner. You still have to make sure your levels are good. But if you crank the fader up a little, now you have your fader at plus 10. I have mine at plus 5, so I don't go completely nutty. The only reason your fader's at plus 10 right now is to make up for the minus 10 dB pad. So I told you as well, that after this recording, you should definitely, work with your gain staging and maybe record some samples of yourself, and then find the right settings all the way through that actually make sense and that still sound good without any clipping.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah, so that was an interesting little. As we're doing the sound check, I'm like, we should be recording this, but anyway, I think we just rehashed it pretty quickly. Yeah,
and it didn't take that long to go through, but it's nice to have someone like yourself on the other side giving direction.
Totally.
Yeah.
And as you're looking at your level, I'm looking at my level, and I'm also using my ears, right? It's interesting. So let's talk about this mic. It's a Spirit made by Aston Microphones. It's It's a condenser. So look, the rule of thumb here with podcasting is don't use a condenser because it'll pick up so much room noise and background noise and all this stuff. So Max, how are you able to do this, my friend?
Well, I'd all along thought that even though I was using dynamic mics, that the room that I record in is really pretty well damped. I mean, it's a storage room, so there's boxes and there's all kinds of junk, piled up. It's a real mess. But acoustically, it's really quiet. And I always thought that, it ought to be able to handle a condenser mic, and I'd always sort of wanted to try that out. And then I saw this Aston mic, and it's like the weirdest looking mic. If you haven't seen this, it's kind of a steampunk looking mic. At least that's how I characterize it. It's really odd looking. So, that drew my attention, and I saw one in a shop, and I went online and I did a little bit of research, read some of the reviews, and they were pretty glowing. So pretty soon thereafter, it went on sale, and I could pick it up for $50 less than I would have otherwise. So I bought it.
Okay.
Almost as an experiment. You've talked about upgrading your equipment to improve your sound. This was more like an upgrade of my equipment just to try it out and see what happened.
Right.
So, if you're a gear hound, you're a gear hound. So
yeah.
It does pretty well in this room. Now, I do get noise come in from outside because I have some windows.
Okay.
And so while I'm using it right now and we're recording this during the day, most of the time during the daytime, I use my Heil mic, my dynamic mic, just because of the greater rejection of outside sounds. But if it's pretty quiet outside, then I'll generally use this. And it seems to be working pretty well. It does have a different sound. I guess they say it has a British sound. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but
right.
It does have a British sound. That's where it's manufactured, where it was developed. So I do a little bit different equalization on this. I find that it, to my taste, at least at this point, it needs a kind of a bump. Sort of a mid-range bump, maybe 3 or 4 dB, around, 3 or 4K, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Without that, it sounds a little bit distant to me. So I've been playing with that. But this is sort of my first foray into some equalization based on my own, dial twisting, as opposed to the automatic equalization that I get out of Hindenburg Journalist.
Yeah, your voice sounds really clear and really nice and warm. It really sounds very balanced in terms of the EQ. And just for you listening, the 3 or 4 kilohertz range is the presence. It's the bite. If you add too much 3 or 4K, it'll hurt your ears.
Oh, it does. Yeah, it sounds terrible if you overshoot it.
It's like, ooh, ow. Turn it down, ow. Yeah, you could even, and if you try it on like a song, if you bring a song into your audio editor. In fact, that's one of the best ways to learn frequencies. Bring one of your favorite songs into your audio editor and then just start, strategically bumping, like trying to bump specific frequencies a lot and hear what effect it has on your favorite song. That'll help you understand frequencies, actually. It's pretty cool.
That's a great tip. Wow, I never thought of that. Yeah, because if it's a favorite song, it's something that you know really, really well.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to hear the differences as you make the different adjustments. Oh, I'm going to try that.
Yeah, try that. All right, so on the mic itself. So wait, when do you EQ the mic? When do you EQ? To tape or after tape?
After tape. I do it in post. So right now, everything's flat. If I'm a guest on another show, and I'm using this mic, then I'll generally turn the mids up on the mixer a little bit. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do this flat with you so that you could do whatever you needed to do or wanted to do in post on your end.
Right, that's great. So if you have the option later to EQ your voice alone, like a solo, like only your voice recorded separately, if you have the option to EQ it later, I always recommend do it later. Because then the signal that you're recording is just the pure signal. Then you can do it later. But you bring up a great point. For instance, when you're a guest on these other shows, they might not be recording you separate, so you might just be lumped into a stereo recording right there. So you can't process it later, so you just bump up the mids on your mixer a hair.
Just a hair, yeah. So I'm doing the EQ for them because in many cases they're not going to do any EQ on their end or in post anyway. So might as well get myself sounding the way I like me, on this end.
I'm interested to hear the low end of this mic because right now, as we're recording it, I mean, I can hear it sounds very clear. I know there's not too much low end because it's very clear and warm at the same time. That's pretty much what you're going for in EQ wise. You're going for a voice, we're talking about voices on podcasts. You're going for a voice that sounds clear and warm at the same time, but doesn't have all this bass and to make it muddy and all that. So on this mic, there's a pad switch, like we talked about. There's 0, -10, and -20. There's also different pickup patterns, right?
Yes, I'm not using any of the other. I'm using the cardioid. This one also has an omni and a figure 8 polar pattern.
Right.
But I don't use those.
Right. So cardioid it's directional toward you. It picks up your voice more than the rest of the room. The figure 8 pattern is so you could literally put the mic between you and another person. It'll pick up your voice strong. It'll pick up the other person's voice strong, but the sound coming from 90 degrees from the side will actually be rejected quite a bit. So it cuts down on the room noise, but it'll still pick up basically 2 people.
So that would be good in an application where you're doing, say, an interview or something with someone else across the table, and you're both on the same mic. That's when you use the figure 8 pattern.
That's it, yeah. And if you do it, again, the same thing applies that you would want each person, both of you, to be as close as you can to the mic. Now, you don't have to be 6 inches away, but at least no more than a couple feet away. That's the thing about people throw a mic on a conference table and like record a podcast and people are like, 6 feet away talking. I mean, there's just too much room noise at that point. So you got to get close as you can if you're going to use one mic to pick up 2 people with the figure 8 pattern. But it's very doable. And the other thing you got to know, if you are going to do that, the other thing you got to do, it helps a lot if some people talk very softly. Other people talk loud. Like me, I'm a loud talker. The sound pressure level coming out of my mouth when I'm recording these podcasts is relatively high. I'm more of a louder voice person in the room. Like if you were here in the room and you heard me talking right now, it's a louder voice. Some people, they talk. Max, your voice is more normal, maybe even a little low, because you're nice and subdued and relaxed, and you're cool, man. You're cool and collected.
Yeah, but I'm not as cool as Barry.
That's frightening.
Oh, hold on. So if one person's voice in the room if one person's speaking much louder and the other person is speaking more softly, the louder person should actually move a little bit away from the mic, and the softer person should actually move a little closer to the mic. So that way, when you record them, their level on the recording is more balanced. More than, one person's level is really loud, and then when the other person talks, it's like way lower. Then you have to mess with all that leveling stuff, and that's when people use Auphonic to level the voices. And you might still have to use Auphonic, but the louder person should be a little further from the mic, and the softer person should be closer to the mic. I used to have some of the Forbes hosts, because they would record, a lot of them, with a Blue Yeti in a conference room in figure 8 mode, and I would just have them slide the mic toward the guest. If the guest was soft-spoken, I just push it 3 inches toward the guest, and then I'd hear the sound check, and then I'd say, okay, push it 3 more inches toward the guest, and then you hear it. You can't overdo that though, because if you push the mic too close to the soft-spoken person, then the person who has a louder voice, well, the level might be more balanced, but then they're going to sound like they're in this big conference room, and the softer spoken person's going to sound really up close, which is again weird.
Yeah. When you have that kind of difference between the two voices, it sounds unnatural.
Right, it sounds unnatural. So That's why I would never. If you're so one thing I could say, if you're ever, or anyone you know is ever planning on doing a podcast with two people, I would say don't use one mic. Just get two mics, and each have a mic right in your face. Be 1 inch away from a mic, whatever mic it is, and usually not a condenser.
Right.
So all right. So you're in cardioid mode, and are there any other switches on the mic?
Yeah, there's a low cut frequency switch, so I could do the low roll off on the mic, but I don't. I do that in post as well.
Good. Yeah. That's a great feature to have on a microphone itself. Is a low roll off, low end roll off. Yeah, for a human voice, you don't really need to roll it off because, I mean, there is low end there, but there's not so much low end. It's not like, a bass guitar or a kick drum or, something crazy. See did a car just go by, Max?
Yes, I was almost going to say, I was trying to decide if I should say a truck went by outside.
That was a loud truck though, right?
It was a pretty loud truck. With my dynamic mic, you would not have heard that. It would not have shown up in the recording. But with this mic, it does.
Interesting. It wasn't loud, but I heard it. And also, so now, oh no, now I have to remember in the post-production to keep that truck noise in. Let me make a note. All right, so this is a cool mic. I've seen this mic before. I looked it up online. I see pictures right now. It is a cool looking mic. About how much did it cost?
I think $350. I think normally it's around $400. It was on sale for $350, as I recall, somewhere around there. The other one that they produce, the Origin, is a lower priced mic. It doesn't have the various pickup patterns. I think otherwise it's basically the same microphone.
Okay. Well, you sound really good. How close are you, and are you using a pop filter?
I am using a pop filter. This is one of those, a lot of mics that have a wire mesh screen or something built into them say, it's a built-in pop filter. You don't need it. Baloney. I tried it. And no, my plosives can be pretty powerful. So I have a pop filter. I'm probably 8 inches away from the microphone itself. There's a few inches between the pop filter and the microphone, and I'm maybe 6 inches away from the pop filter.
Really?
Yeah. So I could get a lot closer.
Yeah, if you could, I would say that'd be better. Well, not right now though. Stay where.
No,
this episode,
we'll
stay
keep
where
it consistent. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
But the point there is, though, that there's a
interesting.
lot of, experimentation and trial and error. It's just fascinating to me. You get a new piece of equipment, and whether it's a microphone, whether it's a plug-in, whether it's whatever it is, there's this period of time it takes to get it dialed in and learn the technique that works best for that particular piece of hardware or software. That all takes a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why it helps if you love it.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let's get to the mic pre. Now, here's the thing about mic pre's. If you're listening to this, if you listen to the show regularly, you've heard me say this. The mic pre is, well, let's put it this way. The microphone and the mic pre, each individually, are the two most important components with regard to the quality of the sound. Like, if you can have a great mic with a really crappy mic pre, and it'll sound pretty good. It'll sound okay. Sound good. You can have a crappy mic, but plug it into a really awesome mic pre, and again, it'll be okay. It'll be pretty good. But when you pair a good sounding mic with a high quality mic pre, that's when you're on the next level. So that's kind of what you've done. Well, because you normally use a Heil PR40. What mic pre did you use with that, Max?
Well, originally I just used the pre's in the mixer, in the Behringer mixer. But a couple of years ago, I picked up a Fethead that is it's similar to a Cloud Lifter. I think maybe more people are familiar with the Cloud Lifter. They both do basically the same thing, and they're phantom powered. and they provide, I think, around 20 or so dB of pretty clean gain. So the FET head is in line in the mic cable, and once I started using that allowed me to turn the gain on the mixer down a lot.
Right.
And I think it really reduced the noise floor. So that's what I use with the Heil.
And do you use the FET head with your new mic?
No. It's right now they're both connected, so I could actually switch pretty easily from one to the other. But I wanted to leave them both sort of independently, preamped, as it were.
Yeah, I like that.
At least for the time being.
No, I like that because then you don't have to switch cables and move stuff. Like you just, if you ever need to use the PR40, boom, you just push up that fader. If you ever want to use the Spirit microphone you're using right now, boom, you push up that fader.
Right, exactly.
That's a big thing in studios. We were even mentioning a little bit about mobile rigs and how it's great to have a mobile rig because if you don't have a mobile rig, if you ever do want to go anywhere, you have to dismantle your whole studio and then when you come back, put it back together. Oh my God.
Yeah. I really hate that. So I have a bag. It's like my go bag that's got basically everything I need in there to take off and go on a trip, record from a hotel. The only thing I do is I do take my Heil on that and the FET head with me on that. So other than adding those to the bag, it's all set, ready to go.
Right, that's cool. So the Warm Audio WA12 mic pre, you said you were in Guitar Center and you said, "Look, honey, it's orange," and and so describe that mic pre a little bit.
So it's, I knew nothing about them before I saw it. And so standing there in the store, since it was in the used equipment display and it was orange and looked cool, and I'd been thinking about getting a nice preamp, I just read some of the reviews, and it seems to be built around a couple of notions that were appealing to me. One is this use of really high-quality components. It does something odd that I played around a little bit with, in that it's got a switch that changes the impedance from high to low. So you can use the impedance you're supposed to use with your mic, or you can throw this little switch and get a completely different impedance that really changes the characteristics of the mic. And some people, I guess, like that sort of thing. So I thought, well, that might be interesting to play around with and explore. But it's basically very simple. It doesn't have a meter on it at all. It's basically, a gain knob and a couple of switches and phantom power and so forth. And that's pretty much it. But I've been enjoying it. I guess what I mean when I say enjoying a preamp is that it's out of the way. It doesn't really represent something that I have to think a lot about. Once it's set up, it just works. Right.
So it has a gain knob, which is the mic pre itself, and then it has obviously a phantom power switch. Changing the impedance, by the way, I have to do a little more technical research on that, but basically microphones. One of the things that has a very different impedance is either if you're plugging an instrument directly into a mic pre. So
right.
Like even without a direct box, because I think that's what a direct box does. But anyway, I'll look up impedance and direct boxes, but mainly that's for instruments. Like if you're plugging a bass guitar with no amplifier, you just plug a bass guitar into a mic pre, and then you can play bass and record it or things like that. Most microphones are regular impedance. You don't really need to mess with the impedance. So, but I'll have to research that just to make sure I don't say anything dumb, because it's been a while since I talked about impedance. But yeah, so I'll talk about that. So, okay, so you have the gain knob, you have the phantom power. You said there's a couple. What else is on the face of it?
There's a pad switch on the face of it.
Oh, okay.
A button. Yeah.
Is that in right now?
No.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly how much it is off the top of my head.
Sure.
And that's basically it. There's a jack for an instrument, like you say, if you want to use it on an instrument. That's pretty much it.
Right, nice. And so you have your microphone, the Spirit, going right into the WA12 mic pre,
right.
and that goes right into your mixer.
into the mixer, and the gain knob on the mixer is turned all the way off, all the way down. Doesn't need any gain from the preamp in the mixer.
That's a great point. If you're ever using an external preamp and then sending the signal into a mixer or some other device that has a gain knob, you always put the gain knob on the channel on the mixer all the way down. Because you don't want to add gain here and then send it to the mixer and add more gain. Like, it doesn't make sense. You know, the reason you would get a good mic pre is to use that mic pre and avoid the less quality mic pre on the mixer itself. So,
right.
All right. So as we're talking, I'm thinking about the sound check we did and the fact that your microphone is a condenser, which condensers usually have higher output. Significantly higher output than dynamic mics.
Yes.
And I'm talking about the level of the signal. Like dynamic mics, you have to crank a mic pre sometimes. Condensers come out hotter, so you don't have to crank mic pre's. You got to set it where it is. But your mic pre is around 10 o'clock right now, I think, or somewhere in that area. So
yeah,
it's interesting to me that with the pad on the mic and your mic pre set at about 10 o'clock, if you crank it up to 11, I heard a little bit of distortion. That almost seems like it's too low to distort. So I almost think there's something going on. So again, whenever you go through your signal chain and maybe take what we've talked about here and kind of mess with levels and mess with mic pre levels and fader levels, and then get your sound, hopefully. Well, right now your sound is great. It sounds good without distorting, but it's just interesting that with the mic, with the gain knob so low that it would even come close to distorting. So anyway, that's kind of like one of these little mysteries with audio gear. Sometimes things happen. You're like, I don't know why that's happening, but then sometimes when you go through it, you'll realize something. So, and I would also mess with that pad knob on your mic pre. That also has a pad
we didn't
switch.
mention that. Yeah, I didn't tell you about that before.
Yeah, that's an option too. So maybe you take the pad off the mic, but you pad your mic pre, bring the level down there.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
In
I'll
fact,
try it both ways, and yeah.
Yeah. In fact, in a way, I like that better because that means this is getting a little deep. But if you don't have a pad on the mic, that means that all the signal output from the mic is going through the mic cable. And you know, when signal passes through a cable, it is susceptible to noise and distortion from other things, other electronic components near it, things from the atmosphere. I don't know. Just it sometimes gets affected by other things, very slightly. So if you put the pad on, that means literally the signal that you're sending through the mic cable is 10 dB lower. So it's even more susceptible to noise.
Yes.
So it's interesting. That's why I mean, again, sometimes unless you're recording like a band and it's really loud, you got to use the pad on mics. Like the classic is the AKG 414s when you use them as overhead mics on a drum set. I think they have a pad switch. I think they do. You would use that because drums are loud. So anyway, that'll be good to know. It'll be good when you get to step through your signal chain and figure that out. But again, sounds great. It really does. I mean, it just sounds great. So let's move on to the Waves D-Breath plugin. But is there anything else about the mic and the mic pre that you want to cover before we move on?
No, that's pretty much it. Other than the fact that the different sound between this and the Heil has been a way for me to kind of learn more about equalization and how that affects the final sound. It's partly like what you said about listening to a favorite song. In this case, I don't know, my voice. Right, it's something that I have come to know pretty well. And so being able to hear the difference in these mics and to play with the equalization, I can get them to sound, at least from a frequency response standpoint, almost identical, just with the equalization. So it's just been an instructive process for me.
I just thought of something that my recent trip to New Jersey, I brought a different mic setup. I brought half my studio, but I didn't bring my regular mic and my regular mic pre and everything. I did bring a Shure SM7B as my mic, which is my old mic, without a special preamp, just literally right into the Mackie board. And I recorded that way. Of course, I do have good mic technique where I do stay close to the mic, except when I laugh, I lean back. So then just to make sure it records at a good level. That's the reason. But when I came back to Colorado Springs and I fired up my normal rig and I started talking, I was like, oh my God, like it just sounded so much better. Like I got to appreciate the sound more, because what happened was when I upgraded my mic to the RE20, and of course, the mic pre I use is a Neve Portico 2, which is an EQ compressor. It's, a really expensive item with a Neve mic pre, which who makes better mic pre's than Neve, really? So when I got the new mic, I EQ'd my voice, I set the compressor, and I went back and forth with it. Like I would record myself and then adjust it, record myself again, adjust it slightly, because I'm crazy like that. But going to New Jersey and coming back, for the first time I got to appreciate the sound I have here, and it's like I like it. It sounds really nice. So that was a happy moment for me as an audio engineer. Especially with your own voice. It's hard to work with your own voice for some reason. It's interesting. All right, let's move on to the Waves D-Breath plugin. You sent me a little note that said you were spending a few hours messing with things. All right, if you're listening and raise your hand if you've spent hours messing with one plugin and then kind of realizing, like, do I really need this?
Yeah, exactly.
So what were you? So the deep breath it's what it sounds like, right? It's the breath.
Right, exactly.
It'll attenuate the breath, right?
Yes, that's the idea. This is all Daniel J. Lewis's fault, actually, because the audacity of podcast, right? Each year around this time, he sends out notices. You can get emails, you get notifications of things that are on sale that may be of interest to podcasters.
Right.
And so it always costs me a lot of money. There's all this stuff,
Right.
So one of them happened to be this Waves plugin, this D-Breath plugin, and it was on sale. It was a big sale. I would probably never spend the list price for it. And on one of my shows, I have a co-host who takes enormous breaths.
Really?
I mean, these are enormous breaths.
Wait, enormous meaning long or loud or both?
Yes, both.
Okay.
I think what happens is this person who is brilliant, actually, and can speak extemporaneously very, very well, and for a long period of time. And I think what happens is, they run out of air after speaking, and just to take a big, huge sucking. So I thought I would try this plugin to see if it would work.
Right.
And so I did spend a lot of time. As I've mentioned, I use Hindenburg Journalist Pro, and that will accept VST plugins. So I bought this Waves plugin, figured out how to go through the process. I was not very thrilled with the Waves installation process. It sort of reminded me of PC software from 15 years ago that had all this copy protection, and you've got to go through. I don't like that process. I just don't. But anyway, finally got it installed. It showed up in Hindenburg just fine, and I started messing with the dials. You've got it's basically got two knobs that you turn. One is sort of a threshold for what does it take to be a breath, and the other is how much do you want to attenuate that breath.
Right.
And what I found in the end was that for normal breaths that maybe you want to knock down a little bit, it works fine. But for great sucking loud breaths, it really can't distinguish between that and normal speech, or at least I haven't figured out a way to get that to work really well. Because what I do when I'm editing that particular show is I manually drop down those breaths, those very loud breaths by
Right.
Oftentimes 6 dB. And so that they're still there.
Right.
So that it still sounds human, but it doesn't just, blow out your earbuds when you're listening
Yeah.
to the breath. So sort of mixed success. I guess my conclusion is if I have another speaker that has some breathing sounds that you want to knock down just a little bit, but aren't so loud, I think this will work great.
Right.
But for these great big loud breaths, not so much.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, as I'm listening, I was going to say that some of the big loud ones you might have to do manually, which you're already doing. And yeah, I've done that too, different breaths. Like sometimes even people who aren't so breathy, like in the middle of a sentence, they'll just maybe they're a little closer to the mic or the angle's perfect. For some reason, there'll be like one breath that's like, whoa, that was loud. And so manually you can go in and drop it. I've dropped some breaths way more than 6 dB. I'd say at least 9 or 10, 11 dB. Occasional breaths, not all of them.
Right.
And the
Not
one
the
thing
normal.
with breaths, so a couple things about breaths and breathing. First of all, it's normal, it's natural, and if things are recorded well and your listener is listening, because it is natural, the listener won't really notice the breaths. Usually. So breaths typically aren't a big deal except for in a case like yours, Max, where there's someone who it's almost distracting, sort of. And
yes.
And you just want to minimize it to make it less distracting and all that. One other thing about breaths too is the more you compress a voice, the more you raise up the breaths, actually.
Yes, that's what I discovered with processing her track and doing the compression, and the breaths just seem more noticeable.
However, so anyway, you can actually adjust the levels after you compress. Like you can go into individual breaths and like you can compress the signal first and then go in and lower the breaths. That's one way to do it. You just have to figure out what works. But compressors will bring up the breaths. But here's the thing about breaths too. Again, take your favorite song and listen, or listen to the radio. Listen to any singer singing and listen for the breaths. You'd be surprised how many breaths there are and how loud they are. You'll be shocked. You'll be like, "Oh my God, Rihanna is breathing like a maniac." But it's normal. Yeah. You don't know. No one ever notices. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to overdo it because as you're editing, you're focused on the sound, and
right.
and so your sensitivity maybe is sort of heightened, and it's easy to go too far in the wrong direction by being overly sensitive to things like breaths that, in the end, are just part of being human.
Yeah. Yeah. So a deep breath plugin, I'm sure it's useful in some cases. I'd say, much like a gate, it's not easy to set the controls and make it work really well. You might have to sit there and mess with it a while and keep adjusting it. That's why sometimes what I do is when I'm mixing an episode, because I basically mix a podcast episode, like I'm mixing a song, right? Everything's on its own track. I'm cutting out silence. I'm removing things. It's like I'm mixing it. It's like literally like I'm mixing a hit record. And one of the things I do is first I'll process each voice. I'll add effects and EQ and compression to each voice. So I'll go for instance for this episode, Max, I'll bring up your voice. I'll apply my signal chain and I'll mess with EQ, compression. I'll get your voice to sound as good as I can pretty quickly. I'll just kind of whip it up, make it sound good, and I'll leave it. And then I'll go to my voice, do the same thing. Although my voice, I already have the signal chain that's already set, so I really just apply that and I don't have to do much. Then as I'm going through the episode and editing and things, as I go, I'll hear something with your voice, Max. I'll be like, oh yeah, there's a little too much low end. And then I'll go adjust the EQ slightly. And then I'll keep editing, and a few minutes later, I'll be like, yeah, no, it does need that low end. I'll go back, I'll re-add that low end. And so as I'm editing and as I'm doing things with the episode, I'm continually tweaking the actual sound of the speakers. And that way, by the time I'm done and I'm ready to just basically make sure the final levels are good, I've heard it enough, and I've tweaked it enough where I know what it is, and I know that it's level, and I know it sounds good.
Yeah, that's interesting because, I mean, I sort of also process each individual, each track separately. But I guess I tend to do it as more of a two-step process, and your approach might be better. And what I mean is I think I edit the tracks together first and then adjust the EQ and the compression and whatever else, and this sort of spot check at various points to see how it sounds for each of the different voices. But doing it all in one pass is maybe that's a better strategy.
Yeah, maybe give it a try.
Yeah.
All right, so de-essing. So you recently recorded an episode where why don't you set it up real quick, then we'll talk about de-essers.
Yeah, just really quickly, we had a guest on Skype in a very noisy environment. In fact, it was a newsroom for a major newspaper, and he had no microphone, no headset mic or anything. He was planning on using his laptop microphone, so we knew that would be problematic, in an active newsroom. So he was able to find a USB mic of some sort from somebody just before we started recording, and we used that. As we recorded, I could tell the sibilance was just off the charts. I've never heard.
Wow.
It wasn't his voice. It could not have been his voice because
Right.
I think a human being would not make those kinds of sounds. So something somewhere was causing this huge sibilance, just very irritating and grating. And I'm thinking, oh God, how am I gonna deal with this?
Right.
Well, I actually have a couple of other plugins that I almost never use. One of them is called Spitfish, and it's a de-esser. It's a free VST plugin, and so I knew as we were recording that I was going to have to figure that one out. So I tried to improve the quality of the sound. Again, there's a couple of different knobs. One is basically sensitivity and what is an S, a sibilant that you want to knock down.
Right.
And the other dial is how much do you want to take it down.
Right.
And boy, it's better published than it was recorded, but I'm sure that it's still not as good as it could be.
That's rough. When the sibilance is off the charts, that's kind of hard to handle because de-essers in general do a pretty good job, but they're not magic, right? So were you happy with the way it ended up or semi-happy?
I would say semi-happy. I'd say I got halfway to where I would have liked it to have been, but what I don't know is how good could it have been. I mean, maybe I made it as good as it could have been. I really don't know.
Yeah, that's tough. So I would say de-essers are great. I mean, de-esser is like a standard thing that you should always have because you never know what voice, what guest is going to come on, and all of a sudden their S's are just slicing your forehead off your body every time they say S. Yeah. But the other thing is EQ. So you can use EQ and de-essing in tandem because EQ, you can actually EQ out some of that range. If it's extreme, I'm talking about extreme cases here. If there's an extreme case of sibilance, then you can use an EQ. You can even roll off the whole high end. You can try that. Or you can notch, take out those frequencies between 6 and 8K. That's the typical S, the sibilance frequency range, 6,000 to 8,000 hertz. You can use EQ and you can also use a de-esser. That's one way to, because if you just use a de-esser alone, sometimes it can't handle it. It's just too much to handle.
Yeah, and I did roll off the high end quite a bit in addition to the de-esser. Yeah, I did think of that.
Nice.
But I wasn't sure exactly where the frequencies were. I did do a frequency plot, not a histogram, but a frequency plot on some of the sibilance that was just sibilance with no words in there. Right. And I got a really bizarre kind of a kind of a plot where you'd have the frequencies, then it would drop off at some point. I don't remember where. But then there were these little like periodic lumps, like there was some kind of like really super high frequency harmonics or something.
Oh,
I'd never seen anything like that before. It was a very odd sort of frequency plot of that sibilance. So
that the sibilance and also the grating, like you said, it was grating, like almost painful.
Yeah.
Like sibilance, 3 or 4K is like the presence and the bite, and that can hurt your ears. 6 and 8K, if it's really crazy sibilance, that can hurt your ears. Once you're up near 10, 12K, that's like kind of smooth. But even 10, 12K and above, if there's too much of it, it's almost like, I mean, you can sort of hear it, but you can more feel it. And sometimes you just feel like, oh, this voice is like, it's grating or it's disturbing you, and you don't know why. That's why sometimes the high-end roll-offs are really good to try out, because they'll take down frequencies that you're in a way you're hearing them, but more you're feeling them. And then you feel like it's not so grating and sharp.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Max Flight, this has been awesome, dude. I'm so glad you're my first real return guest.
Well, I'm learning so much and spending so much time also.
Yes. All right. So you host Airplane Geeks Podcast. What's the website for that?
AirplaneGeeks.com.
Boom. And you also co-host and produce the UAV Digest.
Right. Same thing, .com. That's about unmanned aircraft.
Oh, boy. And also the PAX X Podcast.
Yeah, that's a little more obscure. That's PAXEX podcast.com. Unless you're a real airline nerd, it's not going to hold much interest to you. But we get really down into the weeds on that topic. So that's a real super niche podcast.
Nice. Well, I'm going to have links to all your shows in the show notes. So if you're listening to this, go check out one of Max's shows and hear his voice.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll be one of the better ones. No.
It'll sound good. So, yeah, check out Max's stuff. And, Max, I really want to just take a moment to congratulate you. The amount of effort and progress you're making in the field of audio is really awesome. I mean, you might not think whatever because you haven't mixed any hit records. You might not think you're a good engineer and stuff, but trust me, you are. You're doing what it takes. You're learning.
Oh, thanks.
You're upgrading. You're being critical. You're critically listening to things and trying things, and you're open to learn from others. And it really shows. I mean, yeah. Again, you have a really great sound, and I'm just happy that you're taking the audio part seriously because it reflects on you and your shows too, as well, right?
Well, thank you so much. And it's what you say. A lot of it is what you say on your episodes, your sessions, which is that over time you just keep listening and you pick up little things, and dots get connected, or things fire in your brain, or you try things, and it is kind of a gradual process. If you just devote the energy to paying attention to guys like you and some others, you can't help but improve.
Totally.
Cool.
So that's great. This has been a great session. Thank you again to Max Flight, and thank you for listening. This has been a lot of fun for me today. This feels like one of the best episodes. Sessions! Dang it!
Yeah, oh yeah.
There you go. So thanks for listening. PodcastEngineeringSchool.com is our website, and you can listen to all our previous episodes and enjoy all the guests we've had. We've really covered a lot. So we'll see you next week, and until then, Max, sound great!
Sound great!
Yeah!